Welcome to Women Don't Do That, where we empower you with inspiration, knowledge, and skills to redefine your boundaries and unleash your potential. I'm Stephanie Minton, founder and CEO of Beacon North Strategies and your guide. Small town girl turned CEO while navigating career, motherhood, ADHD, and chronic migraines. Our conversations range from interviews with visionary women to solo episodes filled with actionable insights. We are your hub for turning what ifs into let's go. Are you ready to redefine your possible? Let's get started. In today's episode, we're joined by Marc Hull-Jacquin, founder of Shelter Movers, who I first met at a fundraiser last spring in Ottawa. His organization, the first of its kind in Canada, offers a lifeline to survivors of gender-based violence, moving thousands to safety. Marc's story, from a 15-year career in policy and advocacy to creating meaningful social change, is both inspiring and enlightening. Please note, we'll discuss topics related to gender-based violence, which might be sensitive for some listeners. Tune in to listen to how you can support this crucial mission and be inspired to make a difference. Welcome, Marc.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Can you talk about what motivates you to live your best life and also painting a picture of what your life currently looks like?
My best life. Well, I as you mentioned in the intro, I've worked in a few different fields. I've been in the public service. I was working in political office. I worked in the private sector, and I thought that although not a linear route, it did give me a good flavor of what my different lives could look like. And I know now, working in nonprofit, that this is where I'm supposed to be. This is after my wife and my children. This is probably the most important thing I'm going to do in my life, and serving others is the right thing for me. And I think I'm reasonably good at it, and I think I can surround myself with really smart people, and hopefully make our country a little bit better for others. And so that's my best life, and be able to pay the bills at the same time, which is nice.
Yes.
I don't think any for most people that having to choose between a life of meaning and purpose and a life that pays your financial needs, it has to be one or the other. I think it's definitely possible to have the two, and I was able to achieve that. So I can take care of my kids at home, and I can also serve our community and our country, and you know be proud of what we've achieved together as an organization, and hopefully be useful to others.
I think that's a really important message because I think a lot of people struggle with finding meaning in their work, and whether you can find meaning in your work or not. I think one of my messages to people often is it's important to find it, and it can look different ways for different people, right? And so, like you said, it is possible to find it at work. The other thing I share with people is, for instance, the podcast is a way that I do that, joining boards, maybe volunteering with an organization like yours or donating to an organization like yours, which is something we can dive into today. And having that meaningful aspect to your life and contributing something important is also important to me. So I think that's really important. Can you introduce us more to Shelter Movers? What is it? What do you do? And then maybe move on to your journey of how you started it.
Yes, thank you. So Shelter Movers really started in earnest. I was on parental leave. We have three children. I live in Toronto. I'm from Nova Scotia originally, and that's relevant to this story. So I'm on leave with Clarice, and by the third parental leave, you kind of have the way down on how to do it. So she's doing her naps and stuff, and I'm kind of thinking of new projects and things to do, and ways to be of service to other families, specifically in Toronto. And I'm a law school dropout, and an anthropologist by academic training. So I do my grad studies in anthropology with vulnerable groups, and so start thinking about who are the sort of vulnerable groups in Toronto, and how could I be of service to them. And I'm not an expert in gender-based violence or anything, but I do know how to operate with vulnerable populations, and maybe if I could be of use to them, I could be, you know, be of service. So um, I quickly learned that when people experience abuse in Canada and around the world, really, there are usually different services out. There's the police, you call the police, or you call a women's shelter, or you whatever, and they're all critical services. But when people experience abuse in Canada, they usually just leave with whatever they can grab, and grab the kids in one hand, grab a bag of a few things in the other hand, and off you go. You jump in a cab, or you jump on in your car if you have one, and you run away, and there's no going back. There's no going to get your stuff after. It's often too dangerous, or too complicated, or too intimidating. So what if we could help people leave an abusive relationship in dignity? What if we could help them leave on their terms? And and when we can do that, we can help break the cycle of violence, because we know that people who experience abuse, mainly women who experience abuse from men, and I think we have to call that out, the average time that women experience abuse is the cycle of abuse is 6 times. They'll go back 6 times to that guy.
Mhm.
But what if it's only 2 times? What if it's just 1 time? What does the trajectory of her life look like for her and her kids if she can break that sooner? And so I came up with this idea of helping women move out, helping them leave in a safe way. And I wrote this concept for a free moving service, and I took Clarice in the carrier, and off I went to the shelters and the police, and I kind of said to them, "Who else is doing this?
Mhm.
How else can um, I join and support?" And over again, the answer was the same. They kind of all said, "Huh, yeah, it's really, we don't know how they get out. They just kind of leave." And I said, "Well, what about all their stuff? And when do they leave?" And they said, "Well, they just leave as quickly as they can. They don't ever go back and get their stuff." And I said, "Well, we can do better than that."
Mm.
Um, and so started recruiting. My wife gave me permission to spend some of our money on a truck rental, and I partnered with the local shelter, and I'd work all day. We put the kids to bed, and I get an address and a name or a pseudonym, and off I'd go in the rental van and get up to someone's house and knock on the door and say, "Are you ready to go?" And she'd say, "Yeah." And she'd grab the kids, and we'd pack up a few things, and I take her to the shelter. That was almost 8 years ago, and so from that very simple concept, we've developed a fairly large organization now. We're in 9 cities. We're about to open our 10th city later this year. We're moving about 150 families every month. Um, we'll In 2026, it'll be our 10th anniversary, and we're tracking towards 10,000 families by 2026. And so, with about 1,000 active volunteers across the country, we're doing these moves. And um, as the only service of its kind in Canada, we're sought after more and more, because we're doing something that everyone kind of, someone described shelter movers recently as the wheels on suitcases.
Mm.
Before that, we all just carried a suitcase, but then someone said, "Hey, let's just put wheels on it," and it was just a very simple, logical thing to do. Now, you wouldn't buy a suitcase that didn't have wheels on it; it'd be inconceivable. And
Right.
I see our service that way. It's kind of a staple of our society, that everyone deserves a safe place to raise their kids and sleep at night, and no one should live in an abusive home if they don't want to. And we have a responsibility to be there for anyone who needs to get out.
Mhm. That's such an important story and so much important information you shared. Do you find that by using services like yours, that the percent that women return to the home decreases?
Yes, we've gathered some evidence. We had an evaluation of our service done externally by some members of University of Toronto, and they spoke to the agencies who support survivors, and they spoke to our volunteers, and they spoke to survivors. And so the report was overwhelmingly that they were able to get much more than they ever thought they could if they tried to leave on their own, and that the likelihood that they'll ever return is very, very low. Of course, at some point, someone will do a long-term study, maybe contact people we've served 7, 8 years ago to see where they're at now, and see if their trajectory in life kind of is different now. I hope it is. When we when I was leading those first couple hundred moves, we served a lot of kids, and most of our clients are either pregnant, or they have a small child or a few kids. We know that the risk of violence goes up significantly when the survivor tells the abuser that she's pregnant, or she tells the abuser that she's intending to end the relationship. We see the lethality of the relationship go up. So a lot of our folks have young kids or they're pregnant, and one of our first clients had a little boy who was about 10 years old. So I think about him a lot. He's going to be 18 this year.
Mm-hmm.
So I think about him. I think about what's he doing now with his life? Did he copy what his dad taught him, or did he get out soon enough to figure out a new way of living and a new way of dealing with his emotions, or whatever? Did our country get better now because that little boy's not going to repeat what he experienced?
Mm,
Um, so yeah, I guess we'll never know. But I think what we hear from our clients is that if it weren't for our service, they would still be there.
right,
And we also hear from a lot of survivors who had already exited the relationship. They said, if you'd been around, I would have used you for sure, and I would have ended the relationship years before.
right.
And that means a lot too.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Wow. Are there models like this in other countries, or is it a unique?
So I learned of a for-profit moving company in California that
Mm,
was sort of doing it on the side as part of their sort of community service. So I took a lot of inspiration from that idea, a company out of California. But I really, working in risk in my previous life, I really applied a risk management lens to this. So we offer the moving, to be honest, is the least complicated part of what we do.
right,
Shelter movers, when we're contacted by a survivor or by an agency that's referring the survivor to us, we assess the risk that she's facing, and we do a full assessment of what she needs to move and where she's going. But we also ask her things like, does she speak English or French? Maybe she doesn't, and we need language interpreters to be on the move.
mm,
Maybe she has pets and he's threatening to hurt the pets, so we need to find a pet fostering service to take care of the pets. Um, maybe she's in really serious danger and imminent risk of femicide, and we need police or we need bodyguards for those moves. And so we have relationships with private security firms to provide those at no cost. And almost all of our clients need some kind of storage. The
mm,
moving is, she might be able to afford to rent a couple of guys in a truck, but they're not going to behave in a very compassionate way. They're not going to do it in a sort of discreet way. And they're certainly not going to store things for her for free for as
yeah,
long as she needs it. So it's the coordination of all these different services
mm-hmm,
in real time that I think is really the value that we're adding to our clients' experience.
right,
Um, we're also engaging regular Canadians. As I said, I'm not an expert in the field, but I think regular Canadians would agree that a woman or girl being killed in our country every 2 days
yeah,
is completely unacceptable. And if they can help, they will. And shelter movers is a very tangible way for regular people to get involved, especially men, to contribute their time as allies to this
mm,
cause. And so it's a way for communities to take care of themselves also.
mm-hmm. You mentioned the word femicide. Can you explain what that means for someone who might not know?
Yes, femicide is the murder of someone because they are a woman or girl. It's gendered murder, and it's an important concept for us to be using on a regular basis in Canada because, unlike homicide, which could happen for any variety of reasons, femicide is a very specific type of crime. I shouldn't say crime; it's not technically a term used in the criminal code, which is a problem in Canada because of where the code is in its evolution, the federal criminal code. But we know that women are and girls are murdered because of their gender, as I said, every couple days in our country. And so calling that out and calling it out as gendered violence, it's men hurting women. Women do hurt men, and men hurt men, and women hurt women, and everything in between, all genders. And we know that trans women, in particular, are
Mm-hmm,
many more times more likely to experience violence, but it's usually at the hands of a man.
mm,
And I think it's important to call that out. We say very frequently, violence against women is not a women's problem; it's a men's problem. And as soon as men start to own that and take responsibility for it, the better we will be. And shelter movers, as I mentioned, is kind of a very tangible way for men to say this isn't okay, and I'm not like those men. In fact, I'm going to work against it, and
Hmm.
sets a new tone for masculinity, I think, in our country.
Hmm. It is, when you hear these cases of femicide, and it is so upsetting. And I love that when we look at organizations like yours, it's a how do we do something about it instead of just sitting in that grief or the sadness for someone else, maybe that you don't know often, is what can you do about it? How do these women find out about your service?
Well, we try Shelter Movers really is trying to integrate into the ecosystem of the services that are available to women and to survivors. We do lots of promotional stuff, and podcasts like yours are very helpful to get the word out. But we want to primarily embed ourselves in the services that already exist, so that um, we're not requiring survivors to retell their story every single time they engage a different service.
Yes.
So our primary refers are emergency women's shelters or second stage housing for women. We also get referrals from emergency room doctors, social workers, teachers, um, basically anyone who might be interacting with women experiencing abuse. And so we need to make sure that they know that we exist and that they can refer her to us. The only real criteria to use shelter movers is that they are experiencing abuse or are living with the effects of past abuse. That's perfectly fine as well. We need to be very low barrier. Of course, we don't take payment for the service. There's no cost as long as my board keeps me in charge. There'll be no fee for our service ever. And so we get primarily referrals. A lot of survivors are savvy to the fact that abusers don't necessarily, while they might be watching her emails and her texts on her phone or controlling her communications, sometimes abusers don't realize that they'll use social media messaging. So we get
Mhm.
messages on Facebook Messenger, Instagram, or TikTok or whatever, and she'll let us know that she needs help, and our immediate response will be, are you working with anyone at the moment, and can we refer you to an agency in your area, and they'll refer you back. So she's being brought into that ecosystem, as I mentioned, of services, and then
Okay.
we all work together. um, Very very dangerous at cases, and very laborious to have to contact all these agencies one at a time. We want this to be super smooth and
Right.
super efficient. She tells her story once to a trusted agency, and then we're all basically brought in to respond quickly and in a manner that puts her at the top of the food chain. This is her story. She's the hero of her story, and we get to be there for a small part of her journey. So that's how they find out about us and they use our service. Some survivors, it's not even safe for them to be in direct contact with us. They might be communicating just with the shelter, and then the information is being relayed to us. Others, maybe the abuser's out of the country and it's perfectly fine, and she can
Right.
contact.
So, in order to contact you, so you said, they can use social media. Is there also like a phone number that they can call?
Yes, certainly. Yes, sorry. So yeah, 855-203-6252. I think that's 203 move. It's a toll-free number. They can go to sheltermovers.com and put a message in there. They can contact any women's shelter in the area and ask them to contact us. They can tell their doctor, their local nurse practitioner, to contact us. We really want to be as easily accessible as possible.
Hmm.
Um, and I think our evidence of our response time, we certainly will respond within a few hours, easily. And certainly if there's an indication of imminent danger of something, we'll respond even faster than that.
Right. Wow, that's amazing. And thank you for sharing the information. We'll make sure to put it in the show notes so that people can find you and access that information. One of the questions that I had is that there are so many different forms of abuse, and often people don't even realize they're being abused unless, somebody brings it up or mentions something, and then all of a sudden a light bulb goes off, and there's this recognition. For those unaware, could you explain some of the symptoms around abuse? Uh, to help listeners recognize that maybe they may even be in that type of situation?
Yeah, really good question. Abuse fundamentally is about control and coercion. This is about a sphere of control by one person over another, and it involves a state. In many cases, that there are many ways that abuse, as you mentioned, can show itself, but there are there are stages of abuse and leading up to femicide, leading up to actually murder. Um, and it can start very subtly. You know, a lot of relationships start with love bombing, where the abuser is just doting all on this person, gifts and compliments, and just absolutely building this person up and putting them up on a pedestal and really making them feel special. And that also involves a degree of control, because it sort of positions that abuser as the sole area of love, and
Mm,
so it overwhelms all other areas of gratification in her life, and so the abuser suddenly becomes the primary person on whom that person seeks from whom that person seeks validation and love. So that already starts to narrow the scope of of the survivor's world. Other indicators would be attempts to control what she wears, who she talks to, who she can trust, and so the abusers will attempt to isolate and reduce her sphere of trust from her family. They might start talking to the family about the survivor's mental health and trustworthiness of the survivor's opinion. So they undermine the survivor's credibility in her own sphere with her friends and family. And then if that's achieved or around that time, then other more aggressive methods of control take place. So talking about how she should spend her money, the importance of joining their accounts, the importance of who she's talking to, that she report in to him to tell him who she's talking to, what she should wear when she goes outside. Uh, 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 Seemingly meaningless things, and always couched in love and protection and secure. I just want you to be safe. You know, I don't think you should wear that, because you can't trust what people think out there, and so it's always couched in love and security and protection, but really it's about reducing her sphere of influence and her ability to believe in herself and
yeah.
trusting her own judgment. And that really is the so economic abuse, controlling of finances, um, gaslighting so that she questions her own judgment, undermining her to her friends and family. And then if there's any resistance to that, then it can lead up into physical violence. As they say, he never hits her, he hits near her. It's throwing things, it's shoving things at her. It's always this sort of leading up to actual physical violence.
Mhm.
Um, and so those all those telltale signs are indicators that a really serious look needs to be had at the relationship. Is it really a relationship based on love and trust and respect, or is it something else?
Mhm. I think one of the important, well, you mentioned a lot of really important things, but I think one important thing to point out is that how quickly some of those early instances of violence can lead to physical violence or femicide. That leash or whatever you would call it, or the ruler, isn't very long. And I think that's important for people to know for their own safety. And also that abuse is indiscriminatory. So it affects everybody, from, the CEO to somebody maybe really struggling with substance abuse. It, can be all things in between and both. And I think those are also important add-ons to talk about.
To build on that, yes, most definitely, it's quite indiscriminate. We've served women from homes I'll never be able to afford in isolate parts of the country, and down to buildings I would barely qualify as safe housing at all. Women who are new to the country, women who've been in the country for generations. The stigma of abuse is that this is something that happens to poor women, to women who don't know the Canadian system, and it does. But truly, we really do serve a wide range of survivors. We've served different women fleeing the same man from the same house at different times. So we've gone back
Mm.
to the same house and moved a different woman out of that
Ugh.
house, because that's I think the silver lining for me in this social problem is just how predictable and preventable it is. Yes, it
Mm,
does appear different ways, but there is a pattern here. We can see the pattern, we can measure the pattern, we can predict the pattern,
wow.
and hopefully that gives us a chance to educate ourselves on those telltale signs that you were asking about, to say, wow, I haven't worn that dress in 3 months because he really doesn't like me going out in it. There's something
Mhm,
wrong with that. I should be deciding what I wear, and not that, oh, that's a flag. And then talking about that with a friend or family,
mhm,
or reaching out to shelter movers, or reaching out to a local women's shelter, and just talking about safety, talking about that,
mhm.
as you say, can switch that light on in someone's mind when they don't see their world closing in around them because of him. Such a critical window of opportunity to intervene before things get really, really bad.
Right. I think it's interesting because we would like to think that we've come so far, and yet there's so much work left to be done. I have young girls, 10 and 13, and I have had to go in and talk to the teachers about boys grabbing other girls' bums during recess when the
Mm,
teachers aren't looking in middle school. And so these things are happening, they're still happening, and it's scary, and there's a lot of work left to be done and important conversations, if you are a parent, to make sure that you're having those conversations. I remember having to go in when one of my kids was in early primary school and a boy kept touching her bum when the teacher wasn't
mm,
looking, like that young. And I remember my daughter being furious that I had spoke to the teacher about it. Uh, so even at that age, wanting to hide that from people, speaks a lot. What advice would you give to someone who's listening and thinks, I know somebody in that situation, but it feels too private or too challenging to speak to that person about it or ask them if it's okay? Like, what do we do about that?
yeah, great question. The primary enabler of abusers is our inability to talk to each other about it. By
Mm,
helping it stay private, we help him close the sphere of control over her. We are aiding him in doing that, and our discomfort is one of his in his toolbox of things to use to control.
right.
So I think we need to ask ourselves, which am I less comfortable with? Having a difficult conversation with her, or knowing that my silence is going to further his interests.
Mm,
Whose side am I on? Am I
right.
on his or on hers? And
Hmm.
being on her side means saying, it does not have to be a horribly uncomfortable conversation at the beginning at all. It can simply be observation, saying,
Hmm.
I notice you haven't been texting me very much at all. I want you to know I'm worried about you and I miss you. And if you're uncomfortable texting me because he's looking at your phone every day and asking you that, I want you to know I'm with you. And
Hmm.
if you want to text me, you have a right to do that. And sort of helping to remind her of her own inherent dignity, not judging her situation, not even judging her choice to sort of flip it off.
Hmm.
But enough of those honest, loving conversations might be enough to trigger her to say, wow, I've had 3 of those conversations in the last 2 weeks.
Hmm.
3 separate people have said they haven't heard from me, and they're with me, through and through. Why are they saying that? Maybe there's something going on.
Hmm.
Might be enough. But I think that's the question. Who silence will support him, and silence will
Right.
will will further validate his version of reality, that nobody wants to talk to her, that she's not important, she doesn't deserve their attention or their love, because that's the message he's sending. So if we all are silent about it, we're playing right into that.
Right.
We need the courage to step up and say, I care about you. You're not alone. You've got options if you'd like, and I'm always here to talk about it. And you leave it there, and you keep sending that set message in hopes that she will take that initiative to
Yeah.
reach out.
Think that's really important, and that consistency, right? It might be something that you do every month, every couple weeks, every, couple of years, because those check-ins are really important and those reminders. We've talked a lot already about the services and what the process looks like. Before we move on to anything else, is there anything you want to add to that?
I think I'd like to talk a little bit about our plan for growth.
Yes. Okay, that's great. I was going to ask you about the future, so jump in.
Yeah, our vision for shelter movers, being the only service of this kind, the vision is to really be wherever survivors need us to be in the country.
Mm,
And to do that, we need to expand. We need to be in more cities across the country. We're in 6 provinces now, and that's great. We'll be in a seventh province by the end of 2024. But that leaves in large areas, particularly rural areas in Canada,
right.
underserved.
Hmm.
I think our growth to date has really been very organic. This has been from people in local communities saying, "I want this for people in my city, and I'm willing to show some leadership and bring people together and learn our national standards, and then
Hmm.
bring shelter movers to my city." And that's really what that's how I started it, and that's how I like to see it grow. Um, so reaching out to sheltermovers.com and any of your listeners who are interested in getting involved, they certainly can. It doesn't necessarily mean starting a whole new chapter up in your city right away. Maybe it means volunteering remotely. We have many, many volunteer positions that can be done from outside the
Okay.
actual urban area, in addition to volunteering right on the move itself, because everyone has something to contribute.
Hmm.
We have accountants giving their time for free. We have lawyers giving their time for free. They're not moving anyone, but they're helping us manage a strong organization that's resilient and continues to take on this growth mandate.
Right.
Um, that's very important. Everyone has something they can contribute. We have
Hmm.
volunteer translators who will translate all of our communications into multiple languages,
Right.
because that's what they're good at, right?
Right. I love that. It's the idea that regardless of your skill set, there's something that you can do. And whether that's time through volunteering, like you said, you can be local to the area or not, or even funding, providing funding to do the work if people don't have the time or want to do both is really important. Are there any other ways people can get involved, or does that kind of cover the spectrum?
It does, yeah. Our donations, we receive funding a few different ways. Like I said, I kind of came from the private sector, so I was hesitant to have this be sort of a government run program.
Hmm.
I think we need a variety of revenue sources.
Hmm.
Um, Last year, Shelter Movers purchased a majority share of a for-profit business in Toronto called Fireman Movers. So we bought the business as a social enterprise, and so the business runs separately from Shelter Movers, but they do provide safety training to our volunteers, and we do use their trucks periodically in their storage. But they're a completely separate, autonomous business that serves customers at market rate and moves them. And so 70% of their profits will go to our mission at Shelter Movers, and that's one of many different revenue streams that we rely on in order to continue our mission. And so donations come from individuals or corporations donate. Some give us free storage, local storage
Right.
facilities write that off and let us use it, um, or as I said, there are law firms that are providing pro bono service because that's what they do, and we could never afford full legal representation from multiple law firms. That's just so expensive. But they're making their commitment to their community in that way.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, lots of ways to donate their time and talents
Okay.
and which we need.
Right. What provinces are you currently in?
Shelter Movers operates in Ontario, Quebec, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, Alberta, and BC.
Okay.
As I mentioned, we move about 150 families every month. We are looking now to expand in 2024 to either Saskatchewan or Manitoba. And by March 2026, we'll be in both of those prairie provinces as well as
Okay.
Alberta. We
Well,
already
maybe you'll
operate.
have some listeners that are ready to help you make that move. Jumping onto the leadership transition, when you transitioned from a corporate to a not-for-profit leader, what has been your approach to leadership and allyship in addressing women's issues?
So in the private sector, I worked in oil and gas before this. Very different world.
Yes.
Very very different. But similar skills in sort of engaging those around us. I think the nonprofit sector benefits from the natural passion people have to
Hmm.
serve others. Um, I think the mistake we make in the nonprofit sector is we chronically devalue our work and our talents.
Mm.
I think it's a big mistake for our sector to somehow accept less money or less prestige or respect because we're just doing it to be good people. Well, no, I'm doing this to be a good person, but I'm doing this to feed my family, and I'm
Mhm.
doing it because I believe there's a moral obligation to make our country a better place.
Yes.
That shouldn't come at any less lower pay or lower influence in our society. I think quite the contrary. So I think my leadership style um, has is a little bit novel for our sector. We do even at a very young age. I was very insistent that we have money set aside for maternity leave and a proper top up or a dignified top up for maternity or paternity leave. That we have decent benefits even for part time employees.
Mhm.
Um, these are not the do-gooder stereotype, that I think, to be honest, came out of the religious institutions that would have done the original quote unquote charitable work.
Right.
Well, they were living a life of extreme modesty, and they were not working for money per se. So that whole concept of, do good and you get no pay is coming out of that. We need to evolve past that.
Mhm.
I need the best brains on
Yeah.
this. Our clients deserve the absolute best quality service,
Yeah.
and there's a dollar figure for that.
Yeah, you deserve a smart accountant, a smart HR person, a CEO who's worked in other places. Yes, it's something, that non-for-profits get challenged on a lot, and yet it's so important because you want the expertise to get the most outcomes to help people at the end of the day. And I think that's a really important message. What would you add in terms of allyship as a man engaging on issues that, um, as you talked about earlier, primarily affect women, but also the impact is mostly coming from men?
Yeah, I appreciate the question very much. Because violence against women is a man's problem, as I mentioned. um, I'm a straight white educated male. I do not fit the stereotype for our sector, and I think that's a huge miss in our sector to engage and hold men accountable. I
Mm,
think it's very important for men to play tangible roles in our sector, specifically on this issue and on this problem. And having me as the face of our organization, I hopefully is sending the signal to men who look and sound like me that there's a place for us in our sector.
mm,
Not only is there a place, but we have a responsibility to be playing a bigger role in this,
mhm.
not as the heroes of the story, but as real allies, that we have a place, and it's a very specific role. Men are not appropriate for just any role at Shelter Movers.
Right.
On the moves, we have wonderful men in our organization, but the heroes of our stories are of the story is our client, and her priorities are driving everything we do. And if we're not
Mm,
listening to our clients, we're not really doing our job. And that's true for
mm,
the nonprofit sector or for the for-profit sector. The customer is always right.
mm,
What she wants, we do, period, full stop. There are some security constraints that we can't negotiate on. We have to have a safe environment for our volunteers to operate and things like that. But effectively, she's calling the shots. And so I take that approach in my leadership to our team. We have men and women on staff, mainly women, but many men on staff as well. And so my job is to be uh, uh, um, hopefully an example for men in our sector, and
mm.
also an example to the women who work in the organization, that it is possible, hopefully, to have men in leadership roles in an effective way, that I can still
Right.
operate with enough of a lens that I'm still always learning as an ally. I never
Mhm,
presume to know, um, but that men can be effective here too. We can be useful,
mhm.
so I'm surrounded by women all day. I work primarily with women, um, and they are. I hope they know that my job is to listen. My main
Mm,
job is to listen. I do have a vision for what I want the organization to be, and I often say you can go into life trying to find your vision and enact your vision, or someone can pay you to follow theirs. It's one or
Mm,
the other. And so I tell our staff, you all have a vision for what Canada should be. I hope you can follow this vision for as long as you like. I hope you have a bigger vision that you go and search and go off and do one day. But for now, will you give your time and talents to this vision and we can build something together? I say that to our major donors as well. I need to
mhm.
be surrounded by builders. I need to be
Right.
surrounded by people who want to create something bigger than themselves. And I
Mhm.
don't expect them to be around forever, but I need them for now.
I love it. You, as you were talking, Mark, it painted this picture for me of a graphic of like women carrying like weights on their back on issues like this, and then like you coming alongside them and taking part of it onto your shoulders, and how much it means to have that kind of allyship. And just given a lot of leadership positions have been men, they're like you have such skill sets that you can apply and bring to these issues as well. And so I think that's really important. Before we move on to rapid fire questions, I wanted to ask you, do you have any advice for listeners who might be interested in starting a not-for-profit or getting involved in social justice advocacy?
I try not to give too much advice because I made a lot of mistakes, so I can share those. I think I think whether it's nonprofit ideas or business ideas, I think an original idea is
Mm,
wonderful, um, but that is clearly not enough to make an organization. Um, I think having a good idea and surrounding yourself with people who believe in you and believe in the mission that you're trying to the vision you're selling to the world. That's where the real magic happens. Vicky Sage, it was a manager at the Redwood Shelter in Toronto, in the West End of Toronto. And Vicky, I cold called the Redwood Shelter when I had the idea for shelter movers. Vicky Sage picks up the phone and I said, listen, I got this idea. I don't know how women get out of relationships, but I want to help them move out. But I can't find anyone else who's doing this. So I just need help to develop this idea. And in that 30-second conversation, Vicky Sage had the vision and the courage to say, yep, we've been needing this for a long time. I'm going to help you make this happen. You don't know anything about working with survivors. I'll worry about that part. You build the organization and we'll build the protocols. And so no one knows Vicky. No one knows Vicky Sage and her influence on this. She's our chief operating officer now at the
mm,
organization. But it was women like that, people like that, who heard what they thought was a good idea and said, I'm going to take time out of my day to make this happen." She talked with her boss. She had it added to her job, and off she went, helping to build this organization. So I would say, you everyone needs a Vicky Sage.
yes,
Everyone needs, and don't stop looking. If you have a great idea, you
yes.
need someone who's going to be there with you through that. Obviously, my wife was the primary founder of this thing with me. She bankrolled this. She took care of the kids when I was doing the moves at night. She was doing all these things that no one will ever fully recognize her for. Um, but those are really the two women, the two people who I surrounded myself with to make this happen. So that's if I give any advice, not just have a good idea, find a person who's going to go, or two people who are going to go on this journey with you, because it's
Mm,
a long hard road, and I second guess myself all the time. But those women said, no, you're onto something here. Stand up, keep walking, you're going to be okay.
mm.
We're out together. And that's how we got to where we are.
I love that. That story gave me shivers. As we close off with rapid fire questions, I want to ask you, can you share a rule you've broke that turned out to be a great decision?
Rule I broke. I know that in hiring, it's not efficient to hire two people at a time, and
Mm,
I think that's a big mistake. I often hire two people for not the same job, but two equivalent jobs working side by side.
mhm,
I found that to be, they have an immediate team. They have their own Vicky say they have their own second, their own backer. They learn from each other, and one usually rises up and one doesn't. But you've got two great employees who believe in each other and they have a history together. So I think that's a classic. I don't do it every single time we hire, but whenever we can, we try to hire two people in the same role.
I was going to ask you, who's a woman who continually inspires you? You may have already mentioned them.
Yes, I mean the primary women who inspire me are our clients.
Mm,
Survive. These are women who are making very big decisions for them and their kids, life-changing decisions that I probably will never have to make, and they do it with a lot of grace and a lot of courage and humility. I'm inspired by our clients every time I get to meet any one of them. And then for me directly, yeah, my wife, Megan Hull-Jacquin, she's a lawyer here in Toronto. She is a powerful, powerful human being and wicked smart. And then Vicky Sage, our chief operating officer, who helped basically co-found the organization.
amazing. What's one book that has significantly impacted your wisdom or perspective?
I a long time ago I read Mother Teresa's biography.
Hmm.
And I don't always agree with everything Mother Teresa says, but Mother Teresa said that to be the most helpful person in the world, do the job no one wants to do. Ask for that job.
Mm,
I went to a shelter in Ottawa when I was reading it, and they said, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "I want to do the job no one wants to do." I was probably 20 years old or something, and they're like, "Yeah, no, you don't want to do that job." I'm like, "Yep, that's the job I want. What's the job?" And they said it was running the industrial washing machine for the clothes from the men who came into the shelter in the back room in the basement. Um, it smelled very strong. It wasn't a safe space to work. I did it for a couple months. I was reading her biography, and I think I think people should give her life a chance to learn more about her and what she did.
oh, that's really important. Hopefully, some of our listeners will check it out. And in the future, maybe we'll be reading your book to encourage people to for that life of service that you've chosen. Thank you so much for what you do, Mark. It's so important and taking the time to talk to us today. And I hope that some of our listeners will check out your work and potentially be volunteers in some capacity or donate to support the work that you're doing. So thank you for your time.
Very much. Thank you, Stephanie. This is great.
Thanks for joining us on Women Don't Do That. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a rating or review. Connect with us on Instagram at Women Don't Do That and visit our website www.womendon'tdothat.com for more details. Join our Patreon to support our work. Find all of the links in the show notes. Remember, you have the power to transform your what ifs into let's go. Together, let's redefine your possible. Until next time.